And we've got an amazing speaker coming up next, and I'm going to make sure we get to her right away. And that is Carlee Jackson. So Carlee Jackson is the Director of Communications and co-founder of Minorities and Shark Science, so MISS. And she's working to increase diversity in shark sciences. And we're going to learn a little bit about some tourism and whether that's good, bad, or maybe in between for sea life, and I think in particular nurse sharks. So with that, I think it is time to add Carlee to the stream. Hey, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Doing well in cold Washington, D.C. And I'm guessing you're in Florida having a slightly better weather?
Yes, I am in South Florida, specifically Fort Lauderdale, and it is sunny and humid in the 80s.
Well,
I'm loving it.
Sounds absolutely horrible. I don't know how you manage.
I'm having a horrible winter right now. Just horrible winter.
So have you been able to get in the water at all? I know, I imagine with COVID and other things going on, there's been some changes to your work, but are you still able to actually get in the water and, be hands-on?
Yeah, so I don't have any research of my own going on right now, but I have been able to get out and do some tagging, and, everything is different because of COVID. So like less people on a boat and, masks and everything. But occasionally, like I'm able to get in and snorkel just on my own leisure time.
Nice.
Just go far away from the people. But yeah, it's starting to get back into the field a little bit.
Nice. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to know that you're able to do, little things and still able to get a little bit in the water. I'm insanely jealous. This has been the first year I haven't been in a body of water or a pool. So as someone who grew up swimming all his life in the DC area, this is crazy for me. So with that, I think it's time for us to hear a little bit more about what you're working on. And I will go ahead and, if you want to tee up your presentation, we'll switch that over and make sure that you can bring that up. So let's make sure that we get you going.
Yes, I am going to share my screen. And
go ahead and share.
Right. Can you see it?
Oh yeah, let's going to add this to stream so we can see. Look, there we are. We've got your presentation. I believe that is not a water animal. That looks like it has fur and toes. I'm very confused. Or is that, what is that?
Where? What did
find out? Oh no, just bring it back up. Your stream just dropped off. So we want to see that presentation. No, it's good.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're set.
Okay.
Actually, no, you looks like we may have lost your presentation, so I apologize. Go ahead and share your screen again.
Let's see.
So everyone, this is my first time using StreamYard. It is a great tool and resource for virtual events. But I'm still navigating. There we go. I can see it. Go ahead, bring
let's try this again.
Oh, it was perfect. Before you had it up, I was just commenting on the first.
Okay.
There we go. I was very curious about the animal because I can see that we've got a shark, but from here that looks like it might be like a rabbit, but I imagine it's probably not.
A sea turtle, actually. So this is
time for me to get new glasses is what we've learned today.
When you said like fur animal, I was like, what is up on the screen right now? It's like, oh no.
So now that I clearly need to go talk to my eye doctor, I'm going to let Carlee take over and tell us more about that animal that is not, is not a rabbit, but in fact a sea turtle. So tell us more about not rabbits.
Yes. Okay. So thank you for the introduction. So my name is Carlee Jackson. I just got my master's degree in marine science this past summer from Nova Southeastern University. I'm also the Director of Communications and co-founder of MISS. And I also work with sea turtles. So I get the best of both worlds. I work with sharks and sea turtles. Sea turtles are my second love. And this is a little green sea turtle right here that just finished getting some medications and is looking kind of, I don't know, I think he looks really cute, but we're having a good time. But yeah, I work at a place called Gumbo Limbo Nature Center in Boca Raton, and I monitor the beaches there for nesting activity, and I also work in the rehabilitation center. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my research that I did in Belize on the effects of tourism, specifically provisioning tourism on nurse sharks there. And I'm just going to start out talking about tourism and different types of it, and some impacts that past studies have found. So tourism, think of it as going out and you're just experiencing new things in a new place, you're learning new things. And lately it's become popular in the wildlife industry. So wildlife tourism has become really popular among people because you don't want to go to aquarium and zoos sometimes. Some people want to actually see those animals out in the wild in their natural habitat, their natural environment. So that is one reason why wildlife tourism is really popular. Something else that kind of impacts popularity of wildlife tourism is the fact that we are losing a lot of different species. So we are seeing a global decline in biodiversity, and people really want to get out there and experience this diversity and wildlife before it disappears, because it's something that's a reality, unfortunately, that we're living in right now. We can lose a lot of environments within the next 30 to 50 years, and we can also lose some of those species living in those environments. And people want to go see those before it's gone. So it's just overall really important to study how this activity, tourism, is impacting the environment and the wildlife, because anything that involves human interaction with the environment and wildlife, we need to know what kind of impacts we're having, because unfortunately humans are kind of like the number one reason why a lot of the global diversity is declining. So. All right, so I'm going to get into some different types of tourism. So the overall tourism that I'm going to be talking about is wildlife tourism. So this is just any interaction that you're having with wildlife out in the wild in its natural habitat. So this can range from terrestrial to marine organisms. So you can go on lion safaris, go see elephants on those safaris, or go in a jungle and go see gorillas. And then in marine life, we have marine wildlife tourism. So that's specifically interacting with wildlife in the marine environment. So you can go snorkeling, go swimming with dolphins, swimming with manatees, and snorkeling reefs and things like that. So that's really marine wildlife tourism. And between these two types of, between this type of tourism, there have been some pros and some cons that different studies have found. So some pros are that, the local communities are able to benefit from this tourism. So a lot of wildlife tourism happens in smaller countries that have very healthy environments because they have such a small population, and those countries kind of rely on tourism to, keep their economy going. So that's kind of a positive that tourism has had on these different communities. And another positive is that it kind of increases awareness in some of the tourists. So tourists go on these tours and experience new things, and they probably learn a lot of new things about the wildlife that they're interacting with. And they come back with like a new experience and new information, and hopefully they use that information to kind of change some of their life habits. But unfortunately, there are a lot of cons that come with wildlife tourism, and that is a lot of impacts on the environment. So with snorkeling tours, some of the snorkelers, if you're not a really good snorkeler and you're just kicking your fins everywhere, you can kick a lot of coral. And unfortunately, that does major damage to that coral. Also pollution. So usually when there's tourists, there's trash. So sometimes trash is left behind as well. And it can also have impacts on the animals, the targeted species that are being, observed. Animals can get more stressed out if there are a lot of humans around. Animals can become a little bit more dependent on humans being around because they know maybe they'll get fed. So there's just pros and cons on both sides, and we'll go into a little bit of how some of this can be mitigated as well. And specifically what I'm going to be talking about today is shark tourism. And that is just snorkeling with sharks, diving with sharks, cage diving with sharks as well. And usually with this tourism, you get the word provisioning. And provisioning is feeding wildlife in order to attract it to an area. So most animals that are provisioned are animals that are very shy and elusive. And honestly, I'd say all animals are pretty terrified of humans, especially sharks. We're kind of aliens to them. And in order to keep them around the area, they're going to need an incentive. So that incentive is food, because food is an important resource to sharks, and they will, if you put food in the water for them, it'll increase their curiosity. So this is just a map showing different areas around the world that participate in shark tourism with different species that are targeted. And this is just like a very brief summary. There are lots and lots of different places in addition to these areas, and a whole lot more species of sharks that are being targeted as well. But some of them in this particular map, we've got whale sharks. You can go swim with whale sharks in Belize and Mexico, and also in Mozambique down here in Africa. And also we've got nurse sharks. You can swim with nurse sharks in the Caribbean. They're popular species in the Bahamas as well. We've got the hammerheads in the Galapagos. You guys can usually go there and see the great migration that they do there, where there's just like thousands of hammerheads swimming and migrating in the Galapagos. And of course, we've got the white sharks in Australia. You can go cage diving with them, swimming with them. They're a very popular attraction there. But this is just showing how widespread shark tourism is, and just a summary of how many different species are targeted for shark tourism. And specifically, a very popular species in shark tourism is the nurse shark. And nurse sharks, they are very underrated, I'd say, but they are my favorite sharks. Definitely my #1 favorite sharks, because they're just so cute. So they are not the very sharky looking sharks. When you think of a shark, you're probably not going to think of a nurse shark. They are little, kind of not strangely shaped, but they're definitely shaped differently than some of the sharks that you would think of when you think of a shark. So nurse sharks are really cool. They usually live in like shallow subtropical to tropical waters around the Atlantic. And they are found in coral reefs and seagrass areas. And they're usually found like sleeping under rocks and just resting a lot, being really lazy. That's why they get kind of an underrated rep. You go out snorkeling here in Florida and you see a nurse shark, you're like, it's a nurse shark. If you're me, you're like, oh my gosh, it's a nurse shark. It's so cool. But yeah, nurse sharks are pretty cool. They have really rough skin and thick and tough skin, because they do live in these rocky reef environments. And since they're always kind of jamming themselves up under these rocks, they have to have that tough skin to keep them protected. Nurse sharks also have this really cool thing called buccal pumping. It's the way that they breathe, and it's how they're able to sit stationary at the bottom of the ocean and just being able to continually breathe. So a lot of sharks use ram ventilation, which is they have to keep swimming in order to breathe. Nurse sharks don't have to do that because they have buccal pumping. So they're using their cheek muscles to actively suck in water and pass it through their gills. So these are just some pictures of different nurse sharks just chilling under reefs. I'll also add that they are nocturnal. So the reason why we always see nurse sharks sleeping under reefs during the day is because they're active at night. So they're just resting, kind of gaining their strength to get up and go hunting later that night. So I can also say that nurse sharks, they're popular in tourism because they are like very chill sharks. So you'll usually just see nurse sharks just swimming around and just lazing around, and they're kind of like more of the safer type sharks to be around, because you know that nurse sharks, if they don't want to be around, they'll just swim away. If they're comfortable around, they're just going to lay there at the bottom. So that's another reason why they're very popular in this tourist industry. And then I recently went to the Bahamas a couple months ago and saw some nurse sharks doing some really cool stuff. I said that they do buccal pumping. So this particular area, they were buccal pumping and being able to kind of sit on these really shallow stairs. And nurse sharks, they're specially adapted to be able to breathe in that shallow water because they don't have to keep swimming in order to breathe. So they're just sitting on the steps, waiting for some people to throw some food in the water, and actively buccal pumping. And this is just an example of how nurse sharks, they're just really popular in tourism, and specifically in the Caribbean. There are so many places that you can go swim with nurse sharks or interact with nurse sharks in the Caribbean, specifically the Bahamas. So we'll get into more of what my research was on, my master's thesis. So my master's thesis was looking at the effects of provisioning tourism on nurse sharks in Belize. So in Belize, I traveled to this small little island called Kikulker. It's about 20 miles off the coast of Belize. The island is very tiny, like maybe 5 miles long, but it's a little place called Kikulker, and the area that I did my study in was Sharkray Village, which is right here. So Sharkray Village was an area that provisioned both nurse sharks and stingrays, and it was right off of the barrier reef, the Belize Barrier Reef. So with this research, I looked at a lot of different things, and I'm going to really focus on one specific thing, but I'll kind of do a quick summary of all the things I looked at. So I would set up cameras in Sharkray Village, and I wanted to look at the abundance of nurse sharks in that area and compare it to areas outside of Sharkray Village. So I wanted to know, are there, just compare the number of nurse sharks in Sharkray to the numbers outside of Sharkray Village. I also wanted to look at how attracted the sharks were to the boats. So I'll go into it a little bit later, but I basically looked at the number of sharks when there were boats in the area and compared it to when there were boats out of the area. Just wanted to see, just how attracted these sharks were to the boats. I also did some behavior studies. That was the big chunk of my research, but also the most complicated part. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that, but I looked at different behaviors and just wanted to see how the provisioning tourism was affecting those behaviors or modifying those behaviors. And this is just a cool little video of the sharks in Sharkray Village being fed. So boats would come into the area. It's a very shallow seagrass habitat, like 5 to 6 feet of water at the most, maybe 8 at the most. But yeah, the tour guides would throw food off the side of their boat, and the sharks would just kind of get in this big cluster and swim around and just eat as much as they could. Then, like I said, there were southern stingrays provisioned along with the nurse sharks, but the nurse sharks were kind of like the main attraction. So I talked about a little how I compared abundance and also looked at the number of nurse sharks when there were boats in the area, compared it to when there were boats in the area. So this is just kind of an example screenshot of what I would be looking at while going through my data. So I had lots of footage to go through, but I used a method called the max-in method to count the number of sharks within one frame. So this specific frame had the most amount of sharks that I could see in that whole 1 hour video. And that's what I used as my max in. So there were at least 10 sharks in this frame, but you can already see that there are a lot of sharks in this area. Probably the most that I've ever seen in one area, honestly. And I looked at a lot of different behaviors. That was the big chunk of my research, was that behavior, and I'll just summarize some of the behaviors I looked at. So milling was one. This is a swimming behavior, and it's when the sharks are constantly changing directions. So they're usually swimming in circles, kind of doing zigzags, and they just don't have any purpose to their swimming. Another swimming behavior was active swimming, and it's just when the shark is going from point A to point B in a straight line, and it's usually more energetic and more purposeful than the milling. I also looked at aggression behaviors. So this one, it's a little blurry, but these are two nurse sharks getting into a squabble, and I called that conspecific aggression. So just aggression between nurse sharks. Usually they're fighting over a food source or just for some reason angry at each other. And I also looked at interspecific aggression. So nurse sharks kind of not being nice to the stingrays. And that happened a lot since the stingrays were the second targeted species there. So you get a lot of nurse sharks kind of sitting on top of the stingrays, or nurse sharks like this one stealing the food from the stingray. And you can tell that the stingrays are always bullied by the nurse sharks because they would just be like, all right, you can have it. And then the last behavior I looked at was shark-initiated human interaction. So the shark had to initiate interaction with the human, and that was either initiating touch or coming within at least like a foot of the human, kind of just going straight towards the human. And this was my favorite behavior because this nurse shark was just chilling on my fin, kind of like begging or just thinking that I was gonna give him some food, and it was really cute. So those were all the behaviors that I looked at. And then I also looked to see how attracted these guys were to the boat. So that's the part where I was comparing the different numbers of sharks when there were boats in the area and when there were boats outside of the area. And just visually, we could see this visually, and the data also showed that they were very attracted to the boats. But basically, these sharks in this video, they were already at a boat feeding, and then another boat came into the area, and they said, ooh, let's see if that boat has some food. So they would kind of just popcorn between different boats, seeing who had the food. If they got bored or there wasn't enough food at one boat, they would just try and go to the next boat. And I think this video kind of just shows the sheer amount of nurse sharks in the area. Usually the most amount of nurse sharks that I counted was about 30 nurse sharks at one time in the area. And if you've ever been in the water with nurse sharks, usually you see like up to 2 or 3 at a time. But 30 nurse sharks is just a whole different scene. It's slightly chaotic, but it's still pretty cool. And then my favorite video that just perfectly shows how attracted and habituated these sharks were to the boats. This boat is just going by the screen, and these sharks are following behind it like little puppy dogs. They are like, do you have food for me? We're gonna check you out. But yeah, so these guys, it kind of makes sense of why they're so attracted to the boats. Nurse sharks, each shark uses different senses they use different senses in order to find their food. And with nurse sharks specifically, they use auditory senses, their electroreception, and and smell. And nurse sharks have very small eyes, so they don't really rely on their sight in order to catch their prey. So with the boat spinning around, that boat engine is triggering their auditory and electroreception senses. And the fact that the tour guides are throwing food in the water, that's kind of giving them a reward for using those senses. So it's all kind of making sense to the nurse sharks because how they find food is smelling, listening, and feeling for the food. And this really explains why they're so attracted to the boats. They're really listening to that boat engine because that boat engine is the dinner bell for them. So unfortunately, because of how attracted they were to the boats, they would get hit by the boat propellers. So they would get really close to the boat propellers because the tour guides would feed on one side of the boat, and those nurse sharks kind of just would, they don't really know what a boat propeller is, but they would get really close to those boat propellers because that's where the sound was the loudest from those boat engines. So in this picture right here, you can already see how close this shark is to that boat propeller. And if this boat was to, decide that we're done here, we're going to move to another place and turn that boat propeller on, those sharks unfortunately could get hit by those propellers. We also saw the mid bodies of some of the sharks with cuts and wounds on them. But it definitely was, it was very apparent that these sharks would get really close to these boat propellers, and it was a negative effect that they were receiving from being fed on that side of the boat and from being so attracted to that boat engine noise. So just overall quick summary findings from that. The main one was from the attraction to boats. They were just so attracted to those boat engines. You could see for my thesis, I did have a graph kind of showing how there were no sharks when there were no boats in the area. And then as the time got closer to the first boat appearing in the area, the number of sharks also went up. So the sharks kind of figured out around when the boats would come, and they also would be able to hear the boats coming into the area before they even got to the area. And also with the behavior, I saw there was a lot of different behaviors happening at different times, but overall, this practice has modified their natural behavior. So their natural behavior is being nocturnal, so active at night and just feeding at night, and just not being active at all during the day. But these sharks in Shark Ray Village were very active during the day. They had a lot of high energy swimming. They would swim from boat to boat. They would just swim in circles sometimes. They were eating a lot. So their nocturnal behavior was just completely reversed, and they were not behaving like normal, natural nurse sharks. And this can all really go into their overall health and fitness. And we saw that their health and fitness was compromised with how attracted they were to the boats, but with their behavior, they could be compromising their energy and metabolic energy. So we kind of don't know, we don't know yet how much food the nurse sharks are getting, and if the amount of food that they're getting is enough to actually help them be normal nurse sharks. And also another question that I have is, are these guys hunting at night still, or are they getting enough food during the day? Or are they just completely reversed? Maybe these guys are only eating during the day and they're sleeping at night, which is completely opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. But yeah, so the big question that I always get is tourism good or is tourism bad? And my short answer is it depends. So it depends on the practice. It depends on the management. Good management tries to have as little impact and as little effect on the environment and the animals as possible. So I always say, when you are looking for tour companies that are, more friendly to the environment and just are doing eco-friendly practices, TripAdvisor usually has this signa on different tour guide companies that are eco-friendly. So these are companies that usually they don't feed the animals. They make sure that if they're feeding you, they have all compostable or biodegradable food containers and no plastic or anything like that. And they'll also properly educate you on the environment and what environment that you're about to see. They'll instruct the tourists, don't touch anything, don't take anything, watch where you're kicking your feet. And I think in Shark Ray Village, there's definitely some management that can change or, could be better, especially with how the sharks were getting hit by the boat propellers. A way to mitigate that is to have the boat guides actually put propeller guards on their boat propellers. And we've seen that in whale watching tour boats. They put propeller guards on their propellers so that the whales don't get hurt by the boat propellers. So the same thing could happen in Shark Ray Village in order to mitigate the sharks getting hit by the boat propellers there. So yeah, my answer is always, it depends. Bad management, usually it just has absolutely no one's overlooking the area. No one's making sure everything is good in the area. No one really cares if the animals are being completely, like usually there's no protections for the animal. So yeah, I would always say go look for those tour guide companies that are eco-friendly. If you guys are going out, after everything subsides, if you're going out and participating in different tour guide activities or tourist activities. So with that, that is really the end of my presentation. These are just some of my socials for myself and for my organization, Minorities in Shark Science. So.
Well, thank you so much for taking us on a dive with you. That was really fascinating to learn a little bit more about the nurse sharks and the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
No problem. Hope
I did. I'm sitting here like taking notes and like I find it all fascinating. So fun fact about me, my uncle had a book that was all of these like beautiful hand-drawn shark like scientific drawings.
Oh, that's cool.
That's the exact reason I became a science communicator, because I just fell in love with that shark book, and it's somewhere around the house, I think, in a storage. It's one of those things like I've had this since I was like 5. Where is it now? So I have a question though for you. For the nurse sharks now, and this is a question for them. What is their normal role in their ecosystem where you find them? Because I feel like the boats are kind of messing with that. What would their normal role be?
Yeah, so nurse sharks, I wouldn't call them apex predators, but they're definitely mesopredators. So in the middle of the food chain. So sharks, their overall not goal, but their overall like purpose is to kind of keep our oceans clean and everything. And nurse sharks, and specifically, they eat crustaceans and like mollusks and things like that. And really, their role in that environment is to keep populations of their prey items down. And that kind of brings in the question, like, are they actually still preying on those food items in that area? And if they aren't, unfortunately, those food items can just kind of overpopulate, and that just creates a whole new problem. But yeah, and also kind of we can figure out if the environment is being degraded by the boats being there all the time. It's it could definitely be bad for the nurse sharks, because they need that environment in order to live and to eat and everything. So, and also their prey.
And we need the same thing, because we need that, because I'm sure that there's fishing and other, industry and things that people need around there too. So really taking care of the nurse sharks is important to us too. So
exactly. It's a whole chain reaction.
So I have a question that came in from Fallon Willis, and I think you showed this, but I'm going to run it up just to make sure maybe, someone who came in didn't quite, see the beginning, but also maybe it's a time to have a conversation about, are nurse sharks your favorite type of shark?
Yes, nurse sharks are my favorite shark. And sometimes I get made fun of because, like I said, they're very underrated, and it's like, oh, it's a nurse shark, like whatever. They could be a nuisance sometimes, but I like that about them as well. I don't know. They're so cool. I love nurse sharks. So yeah.
They remind me of Toothless from How to Train Your Dragon. Like the first thing I think of is like, that looks like the little dragon. So that's like, I find them very cute. Like for a shark, I'm like, you're kind of adorable. I can see this. I see why Carlee likes you. I get it. So I have one last question that I'm dying to know. What tool is indispensable for your research? Because I feel like, but I want to know like topside and underwater. Like, what are the two tools you have to have?
Let's see. Topside, I would say, oh my gosh, there's so many. I can't even like narrow it down to one.
Top 2, maybe. Let's we don't have to like, this isn't hard hitting journalism here.
I know. All right, so I feel I'm on the spot. Top 2, I would say always to have tags, and the tagging.
For
just tags to make sure you can actually tag the shark, because if all else fails, at least you have a tag on the shark. And then another thing I would say is essential is, let's see, I guess like for regarding like the safety of the shark, we always have bolt cutters on board because, you know, we have to hook the shark in order to bring it up and tag it. And if we don't have bolt cutters, we can't get the hook out. So that is essential. Yes. So we have to have bolt cutters or pliers. And then underwater, since all of my research was observational and like in the water, I would say the essential thing that I had was definitely my GoPros, and with charged batteries. That is important.
Batteries are important.
Yes, charged batteries. And also a dive slate. My dive slate was my best friend during my entire.
What's a dive slate for those who like me don't know what that is?
So it's just literally like a plastic slate that's usually white and usually like about this big and like
a whiteboard.
Yeah, just like a whiteboard, and you use a pencil. You can write underwater with a pencil like perfectly, and you erase it if you need.
I don't know this. How do you writing with a pencil underwater? This sounds like magic. This is amazing.
There's just something about pencils that I guess it doesn't erase underwater. I mean, you can erase it, but you can just write on the plastic slate, and it writes perfectly. Yeah.
So that's incredible. I learned that basically you're a dragon trainer because you're working with Toothless and you're performing magic underwater by writing on a whiteboard underwater. So basically scientists are just magicians doing crazy, amazing things and teaching us more about our world. That's what I learned. I don't know about anyone else. That's what I learned from this whole thing, is that Carlee is incredible, amazing, and does some great scientific work. That's what I'm taking away.
I'm a magician. There we go.
You heard it here. She's a magician. Well, Carlee, thank you so much for chatting with us and being part of Women Blaze Trails, and for sharing a little bit of an insight into your world and your magic.
Yes, thank you for having me so much. This was really cool.
Well, thank you, and have a great rest of the weekend.